Hello folks, and welcome to another Richard Head Longbows video. I don't know why I said that so seriously. It shouldn't be serious. They're easy. These are quick tips, and this will be quick, hopefully, and a tip. And interestingly, that is what we're looking at. We're looking at tips, or more to the point, arrowheads. These are medieval style hand-forged arrowheads to go onto these medieval style arrows. This is a poplar shaft, bob-tailed or tapered, so it's thinner at one end than it is at the other. This particular one's got 1/2 inch, so the meat end, the bit where we're going to attach the head to, is 1/2 inch. These have then got goose fletchings on, bound on with linen, cow horn insert nocks. I don't know whether you can see that there if I hold it a bit closer to the camera. Anyway, there you go, you get the general idea of what we're making. Now there's a few methods to fit these. You're probably thinking, but you've already done a video on fitting piles. Well, these aren't piles, they aren't as consistent as piles. The videos that we've done before shows fitting the modern brass piles, which are, well, they're machine made, so they should be even in depth. The inside is clean, is perfectly cylindrical inside, and so therefore they're relatively easy to fit, and you can use a tool to reduce the diameter of the shaft to be able to fit those piles to it. With these, and I'm sure Hector will hate me for saying it, aren't all exactly the same. Now this is a problem that I'm sure he will attest to, where people often ask for them to be exactly the same or the same weight and don't appreciate that these are, well, bashed out of a bit of metal with a hammer. I know that oversimplifies what he does, but that's what they are, and they're pretty amazing considering, but they aren't exactly the same on the inside. So we need to do a lot of handwork. In fact, let's face it, the majority of fitting these is going to have to be done by hand to take account for those differences. Each one that you fit is going to be slightly different to the next one that you fit. If you're making, say in this case, 6, so I've got 6 arrows and 6 heads, they're all going to fit ever so slightly differently. The main thing that will be fairly similar is fairly similar is the outside diameter of the head. That will fit approximately the same, but the inside, the shape of the inside can vary slightly, so that's what we're going to need to take account of. The first thing you're going to need to do is cut the shaft to the length. Now if you're making a set of arrows, you'll probably want them all to be the same, so bear in mind the socket length. The depth of the socket will vary, particularly on the inside. The overall length of the arrowheads may look the same, but the socket may vary. Take something small, put it down inside, and measure it against your arrow. Now you'll need to do this with the rest of the arrows that you're doing, so it's probably best to assign, if you like, an arrowhead to an arrow, put it to one side, so you've got all of them with the heads that you're going to fit onto the arrow already. Measure them up, put the line onto the shaft, then compare it against the other shafts that you've got. So those are the lengths that you're going to end up with if you fit the pile to where you've marked it to. So you may need to alter them so that they're all the same. So we've got our line, we can then draw that line around the arrow, so we end up with a circle around the arrow. Now the first method really is the simplest and probably is the way that would have been used and is pretty quick. You can then score around that line with a knife like I'm showing you here. Be careful not to go too deep. This is going to provide the shoulder for which the arrowhead is going to butt up against. You then simply remove the rest of the wood from where that shoulder is, as I'm showing you here, into a cone shape, much as you may have sharpened a pencil when you were at school if you were allowed a knife. Now you're probably not going to take too much off at the beginning because you don't want to overdo it. You can then apply the arrowhead to that cone to see how far you've got. So start small, start with small amounts, start slowly. Don't take off too much wood, otherwise you'll end up with it just wobbling around. You'll see marks appear on the upper portions of what's protruding out of that cone, i.e. the bits that are touching the inside. So if you give it a good go with that, wobble it around onto the cone, you'll actually leave black marks where you can remove, which is a handy guide. So you can remove those marks, apply it back on again. So once you've taken enough off there and the arrowhead is actually fitting flush onto that shoulder that you've made, the next thing you need to do is eye down the arrow and check that it's on straight. Again, if it's not, wiggle the arrow slightly and you will find the inside of the arrowhead, it does leave black marks where it's touching the wood. Now say the arrowhead's bending too much that way, then obviously removing some wood off this side will bring it back across. And again, you need to eye down it, check it out. The easiest way to remove wood is actually with a file once you've got to this sort of stage, because obviously using a knife you can accidentally take too much off. Now that's really the second method that I was going to show you, which is using a file. So we do the same score line that we do with the knife and do a little bit of removal with a knife, and then do the rest of it with a rasp and a file. You'll find this is a slightly slower process than using the knife, but much more safe. You are much less likely to remove too much wood that you would with a knife, i.e. accidentally chop the whole end off with the knife, which of course is possible. The third and final method that I'm going to show you is to use a bandsaw. This takes quite a lot of setting up, so it's really useful if you're doing more than a dozen arrows. If you're doing lots of arrows and you want to just reduce lots of shafts down, ready to fit the pile on, then this is a great method. What it does help you with is getting a neat shoulder onto the arrow and reduces the end of the shaft evenly. Now you need to set your stop up onto the bandsaw. I use a hobby type bandsaw which I can fit onto my workbench, and it's easier to work at than a large bandsaw. It's a much finer blade and it's, well, a lot easier, and obviously you don't risk taking quite so much wood off. So you set your bar up, so you set the correct depth that you want to take off at the sides here, and also set a stop at one end. So you set that stop so that the arrow doesn't go any further than the mark that you've made on your arrow. Then it's a simple case of, as you can see on the video here, of pushing the arrow in, taking it back out, turning it a little bit, pushing it in, taking it out a little bit. Anyway, yeah, you get the idea. So eventually you've gone all the way round, as I say, and that does leave a rather neat shoulder onto the arrow shaft there. And then the rest of the method is like I've shown you before, but again, that's only really any use if you're doing lots of arrows, because the setup is quite time consuming. Again, a couple of things to note: clean out the inside of the pile, or the arrowhead I should say, before you start doing any work, because you'll probably find there's there's some nasty stuff in there that might stop it gluing on quite so easily. Hopefully that answers all your queries about putting arrowheads onto medieval arrows. We use a two-part epoxy to glue them on, we find that works well for us. If you want to see more quick tip videos on making medieval arrows or any aspect of bow and arrow making, then please do like and subscribe and all that other groovy stuff. Yeah, that'd be great. See you again.